Good day, gentlemen, and welcome to the Home Health, Hospice, and Home Medical Equipment, a Governance Perspective conference call. At time, all participants are in listen-only mode, and we will facilitate a question-and-answer session towards the end of today's presentation. If at any time during the call you require assistance, please signal your line by pressing star followed by 0 so that I may assist you. And now I'd like to turn the call over to Michelle Cooper, Senior Vice President, Corporate Responsibility Officer for CHI.
Our 10th in a series of quarterly web education offerings that we do through the Corporate Responsibility Department at CHI, with hopes of helping our fiduciary leaders learn more and understand the complex world of compliance, because we know it can be a very complex and difficult area for many. Before we start and I introduce our speakers, I would like to offer the following, and it's called a winter prayer. Huddled together this morning, our community a place of warmth and lives as we share the flame of hope and connection. Let's allow the frost of isolation and bitterness to melt away as we open ourselves to a sense of peace and spirit. We extend thoughts to all those who are cold this morning, lacking shelter or love to keep them warm. Wrap our prayers around them, any other like scarves, and wish each other safe journeys through the storm. May be insulated from fear. Earth is insulated by the snow. And bulb, may we continue to grow and open inside despite the cold, ready for spring to stretch and grow towards justice. Amen. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Janet Connett. Janice is our Regional Corporate Responsibility Officer for CHI Health at Home. And Janice has been in the business for a long time. She's actually in home care since 1988, and she began as a Director of Operations and then moved into a Vice President of Professional Services in 2005. And then we were lucky to recruit her away about 5 years ago to head up all of our compliance for our home care, hospice, and DME across the organization. So we're very excited to have Janice on board, and I'm going to let her introduce our additional speakers. So I'll turn it over to you, Janice. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Also with me today, I have Gina Lucas. Gina is the Associate CRO for CHI Health at Home. Gina is responsible for the monitoring of home care, hospice, home medical equipment, home infusion, and non-emergent transportation. She participates in our due diligence process. Gina has been an RN for 24 years, and Gina is certified in OASIS, which is specific to home care. That is our comprehensive assessment tool. She's certified in coding as well as her certification in infusion nursing. So we will get started with our presentation today. The objectives of the presentation is to help everyone understand the current structure and state of home health, hospice, and home medical equipment. You will hear me refer to that as HME moving forward. Understand the risks associated with these business lines, as well as highlight the risk mitigation strategies specific to home health, hospice, and HME. We're going to look at our current trends, and today we see an increased focus from CMS and OIG. We've seen increases in relator and whistleblower claims. We've seen increased scrutiny by Medicare, Managed Medicare, and Medicaid through record audits. We have multiple contract reviewers now for Medicare with a technical focus. Our appeal process is taking years. Recent major settlements in a challenging regulatory environment have increased. In order for us to get an appeal to ALJ, it's taking us almost a year to even get it to the ALJ, and then it's taking another 547 days to get it through ALJ. This is an increase from 221 days in FY13 and 135 days in FY12. So you can see the level of scrutiny that all of this has created. And I am so sorry for my voice today. I apologize. Health rules and regulations. We're going to look at our risks. And today we do have risk with our face-to-face encounters, with our therapy reassessments and goal establishment, and our physician certification statement. Health is required to have a face-to-face encounter from physician to the patient within 30 days prior to us admitting, 90 days prior to us admitting, or 30 days after we admit. Every one of our business lines that we're going to talk about today is required for this face-to-face encounter. Based on current risk, industry-wide from 2013, 60% of all denials have been because of a face-to-face requirement. The requirement is subjective. Different Medicare contract reviewers come with different conclusions regarding on the compliance of the face-to-face encounter documentation. The face-to-face requirement changed in January of 2015, and we have not seen any audits or results based on the change that occurred. And the change that occurred was we are now required to rely on the physician documentation that is housed in his record. The issue comes, we have no idea what his documentation looks like until we request his record for that day. In the 2016 final rule concerns, we're going to have some payment rate readjustments, with expected reduction in spending for home care to the tune of $260 million. Also getting ready to go into a value-based purchasing pilot program we're going to discuss. So starting in 2016, CMS just mandated 9 states to participate in a home health agency value-based purchase pilot program. We've listed the 9 states for you, and CHI Health at Home is currently located in 4 of those states. That would be Washington, Iowa, Nebraska, and Tennessee. They're using the 2015 data as the baseline year. They will do a performance review on all of these agencies in 2016. The payment year will be 2018, and we can expect to see anywhere from a 3 to 8% incentive or withhold, and they expect to get to that 8% by 2019. The principles behind the value-based pilot program, a broad set of outcome measures to capture home health complexities. They do still have the flexibility to include the Impact Act proposed PACT measures. They'll develop a second generation of measures, outcomes, and health functional status, decision-making, and patient activation. There is a balance of process, outcome, and patient experience, and ability to measure the cost and the value, and to measure on appropriateness and overuse. Per CMS, the Impact Act provides opportunity to address all of the priorities within the CMS triple aim: better care, healthy people, healthy communities, and affordable care. The performance measures, we have to achieve and improve patient outcomes, process outcomes, and patient satisfaction. They're going to take the measures from our OASIS tool, that is our comprehensive assessment tool. We are required to perform an OASIS assessment on every patient at the start of care and at the end of care, and the outcomes have to show that patients have improved their performance in functional measures, cognitive measures. They will not pay us for having a patient be stable. So if we don't show improvement just by stabilizing a patient, we won't see an incentive. The scoring will be quarterly assessments of all those measures, and they're looking at small and large volume comparison by state. And what I mean by that is a very small agency of approximately 500 patients will be compared to another agency of the same size. So large agencies and small agencies will not be compared to each other. It will be an apples-to-apples comparison. What we have seen in home care and value-based purchasing is one of those. Payment innovations continue to surface. When I first started in home care, we were paid on a pay-per-visit model. We then went to an episodic payment model, so we got paid for a 60-day episode of caring for a patient, and now we're seeing this new bundled value-based purchasing pilot program come to fruition. We also are being looked at being involved in the bundles and the ACOs. We expect that this value-based purchasing to be implemented by managed Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial payers. We have seen that throughout the years with the different payment strategies that CMS has come with. So we do expect to see this value-based purchasing for those payers in addition. Our concern with this is that the measures that have been chosen, the financial risk, the flexibility to add or change measures as we go through this. So as we look at our quality outcomes, it has on numerous occasions looked at where we have been successful, taken those measures away, and brought in new measures for us to adhere to. Next, we're going to talk about risks associated with hospice. Again, one of our current risks is the face-to-face encounter. A risk of a notice of election submission and form content requirement. We are required to submit a notice of election for our hospice patients within 5 days of admission date, and not only does it have to be submitted, it has to be accepted by Medicare. And we also have our certificate of terminal illness. That's required. Each physician is required to write a certificate of terminal illness for each hospice patient. And they're required to continue to write that terminal illness for every benefit period that the hospice patient has. Concerns with the 2016 final rule, we will see a payment reduction for hospice for a length of stay greater than 61 days, which is a huge issue because CMS data indicates that the average stay for a hospice patient is a minimum of 71 days. The payment reduction will get a majority of our payment on these patients in the first 60 days, and then we'll see a reduction from day 61 until day 7 of the patient actively dying. That's when they'll increase our payment again. Implementation of the hospice item set, the HIS, and also includes a payment reduction risk. The HIS is a quality measure system requirement, and if you don't meet that requirement, they will reduce your payment by at least 2%. Our hospice risk areas, Medicare audits for notice of election, submission of compliance. That's a technical detail again. Not only does this record have to be submitted, but it must be accepted. So you have to make sure that you're looking to make sure it's accepted. We will see an increased frequency of state and federal on-site reviews as a condition of participation. Hospices throughout the nation have gone as long as 9 years without a CMS review. Health gets reviewed at least once every 3 years. The OIG has looked at CMS and said you need to increase your focus on hospice. So we expect to see increased reviews, probably similar to what we're finding in home health, and that is at least once every 3 years. I'm sorry. Our discussions requiring hospice payment bundles include curative treatment as well as comfort measures. In order for a patient to qualify for hospice today, they do have to give up their curative treatment. And what CMS is saying, the post on the table, is that patients will be able to continue with their curative treatment and still be able to elect hospice as a benefit. So the risk there is you need to be aware of the planned treatments and regimes, because once a patient elects their hospice benefit, hospice is required to pay for treatment, medications. So the monies that we receive, we have to pay for the services that are going to be provided to the hospice patient. We're going to move into home medical equipment. Again, one of the risks for them today is the face-to-face encounter. One of the biggest risks, I think, for HME all over the country is the DMEPOS competitive bidding arrangement that CMS imposed. It was posed back in January of 2011. That's when the first round of bids went out. What we've seen from that first round is a decreased reimbursement on an average of 45% on some of our supplies, and you can imagine what a decrease in 45% reimbursement would do to some locations. Bid areas and regions continue to grow every year, so every year CMS is looking and adding new regions. There is no rhyme or reason that we've been able to determine on how a region is upbid. Some examples I can give you, and it makes no sense. North Carolina has 3 cities in a bid region. South Carolina has 3 counties in a bid region. In Texas and all of Texas, it's only Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington. So some states go by counties, some states go by cities. Some states have no bid regions at all. So I cannot help anyone understand how these regions are picked. The other risk that we have with our HME is we are starting to see increased commercial insurers and managed Medicare programs aligning with the bid reimbursement. So in the past, we have received better reimbursement from those payers, but now we're starting to see them holding us accountable to the Medicare bid rates. Other risk areas, we have increased Medicare audits for local national coverage determination. We've seen a lot of technical denials there, and when I say technical denials, they can deny us for not having the physician date his signature, and we've seen denials for no date. We have the ability to serve fewer Medicare beneficiaries due to this bid process. We have seen many locations go, not ours, but we've seen many other smaller HME locations go out of business strictly because of the bid process. CMS doesn't look at quality. They do, but we haven't been able to determine that that's a true fact. What they do is they simply accept the lowest bid, and that's what we're finding. Some larger organizations bids that smaller locations couldn't even attempt to abide by. And those are the locations that the lowest bid is the locations that we see with this bid. So I'm going to turn this over to Gina, and Gina will talk to us about how CHI Health at Home is mitigating some of these risks and what you can do if you have an agency that is not under.
First of all, from an organizational perspective, we have put a number of policies and procedures together. And you're seeing on the screen is some of the examples of the policies that we have implemented. and claims reimbursement when it comes to compliance. We perform a compliance risk assessment annually and either develop additional policies based on what we're seeing or additional monitoring activities based on what we saw with that assessment. We have a policy regarding detecting and preventing fraud, waste, and abuse, so that way it's out there in front of all of our employees how to look for fraud, waste, and abuse. We have a policy relating to claims for payment and some of the risks associated with that as well. We have a policy regarding auditing and monitoring, how often, how frequently. Again, it leads back into that risk assessment. The auditing and monitoring policy discusses the annual risk assessment and how those goals should be based on risks that we're seeing. And we have a policy regarding the compliance education and training for our employees, again, to keep it in the forefront so that we do not run the risk of issues happening within the organization. We've got that in the forefront of them at all times. From an auditing and monitoring perspective, again, like I spoke about the risk assessment, Janice spoke earlier about the national and local coverage determinations. Look at the clinical appropriateness of our records. So in applications, we are touching the patient records to ensure that the care that we are providing does fall under, does fall under and does meet the regulations so that we're not providing care outside of the expectations. Risk-based monitoring, again, going back to that risk assessment, if there were additional risks that we discovered internally or those that are put out when we do research on a regular basis, any new regulations that go out, any new national trends that go out, we're adding those to the monitoring as well so that we can ensure internally we're doing the best job we can in case somebody from the outside starts looking. The due diligence process in place so that in the event that we're looking at purchasing or integrating new organizations, we have processes in place to ensure that what we're seeing that they're currently doing is compliant and what education needs to be put in place when we do bring them into the organization so that we can bring them in as a compliant group at that point in time. Monitoring also involves the conditions of participation, the claims processing manual, or any of the billing requirements that goes along with that, so the conditions of payment, and the local and national coverage determination. So the eligibility regulations, some of those technical things that Janice was speaking to earlier, all of those are involved. Documents as well so that we can make sure that we're adhering to the eligibility, et cetera, for the claims that were submitted. In addition to that, the DMEPOS has supplier standards that are to be met. Unfortunately, as a business line, there has been, and you've seen it on the news, a large amount of fraud in that particular line of business. So impose additional supplier standards, such as your doors have to be open based on what the sign is on your door. So if you're supposed to be open from 9 to 4, do you have it manned from 9 to 4? Making sure that we are in compliance with all of the supplier standards as well. Some takeaways for health, face-to-face, Janice spoke a great deal about that. This is such a subjective arena with the different types of reviewers that are out there that CMS has engaged and contracted with. We are seeing a different opinion for pretty much each one of them. So the same document or the same content within the document could have gone to 4 different reviewers and it'd be looked at 4 different ways. So fortunately, it is not a black and white issue, which continues to put home health at risk with that. Into that, since its inception in 2011, they changed the regulations each and every year. Add a little, subtracted a little. So at any point in time, when a request for record comes through, we're going to go back to that year's regulation to ensure that we were meeting the regulation at that point in time. And unfortunately, on the reviewer's end, they're not necessarily doing the same thing. So we may have been denied for something that was not the regulation at the time, helping them to see what the regulation was during that year to show them that we were in compliance with that regulation. Value purchasing, basically because it is so new and with everything else, it's trying to figure out how it's going to be enforced. We're sure that we're going to review and improve our baseline performances now for measures that have been established and make sure that we are keeping tabs on the ones that may be coming down the line. Internally performing quality monitoring to ensure that where we are with those performance measures are where we need to be, and then continually improving. Taking a look at the quarterly assessment results when they come out to ensure that where we thought we were is where CMS is telling us that we are, so that we aren't blindsided, that we are behind with quality measures when we actually thought we were ahead of the game. The risk associated with that is when Janice was speaking that other payers have implemented payment changes and incentive programs, that this is going to lead outside of just the CMS, just the straight Medicare, and go into other managed Medicaid, managed Medicares, et cetera, and that this will become then a payment process for those as well. This, again, taking a look at the average length of stay, Janice spoke to it, that 71 days is what CMS is currently saying is the average length of stay. In addition to signing a certificate of terminal illness, he's saying, or she is saying at that point, that patient is expected to in the next 6 months. So 61 days is a whole lot less than 180. So that puts us at a disadvantage with that expectation of a certificate of terminal illness. So keeping an eye on our length of stays in order to make sure that we are able to manage that reimbursement with the cost. Manage the spending based on the expected reimbursement. As Janice said, once a patient elects hospice, we are responsible for everything associated with that patient and that terminal illness. So making sure we're managing our spending. Look at the hospice item sets, the submission and the acceptance, and making sure that we are meeting those time frame requirements. The acceptance portion becomes a risk when there are issues with the Medicare acceptance portion that we just recently had, where the system wasn't functioning necessarily on the other side of the fence, and so acceptance weren't happening within that 5 days. So they have to appeal, explain why we didn't meet that 5-day regulation. So payment gets held up based on no matter whose fault, so to speak, it is. And monitoring with conditions of participation so that the branches can be survey ready at all times. As Janice spoke about, was potentially 9 years in between surveys in the past, now decreasing it to every 3, making sure that the branches are aware of any new things that are coming out, making sure they're compliant at all times. Finally, increasing knowledge and research as it relates to curative treatments for the terminal diagnoses. So at any point in time, when this or if this potentially does become a regulation, that we can then manage the cost versus reimbursement for any of those new treatments. Finally, medical equipment. The bid process, the competitive bidding process, 2 to 3 years, every region has what they call a rebid or a recompete. And knowing when each region is coming due, so we can make sure, number one, we know the equipment and supplies that are going to be up for rebid or recompete, make sure that we are well aware of the cost. It changes over that 2 to 3 year period so that we are going to ensure that the cost, we are not going to underbid ourselves based on the cost of the equipment and the supplies. And currently the rebids are coming up every 2 years. They did a mail order bid. That one was 3 years, but every other region, when it's a face-to-face delivery or a type of delivery, it's been a 2-year rebid. And finally, to ensure that we can read and rebid to maintain the CMS established quality and financial standards at all times, so that way we are eligible to bid at that point. With that, that kind of concludes our presentation, and we will now entertain any questions.
Ladies who wish to ask a question, please press star 1 on your phone. Again, that is star followed by 1. I'll pause momentarily to wait for our first question.
And maybe while we're waiting for a question, this is Michelle, and I'll just pose this question to both of you. If you were on a board that had oversight of any of these areas, what would you be most concerned about from a compliance perspective? What would keep you up at night?
I think the thing that would keep me up at night is knowing whether monitoring or the correct monitoring activities were in place. We need to validate that care that we're documenting, the visits that we're submitting payment for are being done. At the care, and I think this is one of the things that's more difficult with our business lines. We are not providing care in the confines of the 4 walls acute care has. We are actually in people's homes providing the care, and that's one of the reasons. Part of our reviews when we go out is we do watch care that's being provided. So I think knowing that quality care is being provided, people are being treated with respect and dignity, Michelle. I think that's one difficulty that home health has, because there really is not another nurse in the next room that you can yell for help, or that somebody is observing the care that you're providing.
Great.
There are questions in the queue.
Okay, pose another one. Just as a compliance professional, you go a day where there isn't some kind of publication out there about, care fraud or shame operations, those type of things. Why do you think it's so easy for individuals to enter this field and really defraud the government? And your thoughts on that?
A lot of the states do not require home care to be a licensed agency. For instance, here in Ohio, I could drive down the road and hang up a sign and call myself a home health agency. And the majority of the states are that way. I think, again, because you don't have to have that brick and mortar facility where people come to work, I think it's very easy for people to obtain the information they need in order to bill for business lines. You need a Social Security number, you need a Medicare benefit number, and you need a provider number. So I think it's just too easy, and I think that's why some states have hundreds. Texas has 800, 900. I can't remember how many agencies they have. They're so large that there's actually a moratorium on home care. So, and that moratorium has been in effect now for 2 or 3 years, and they just approved it again. So in January, it's up for renewal again, and I suspect they will continue to keep that moratorium in place. So I think, it is just simply too easy to say you provided a visit. I was physically in the hospital.
In addition to that, when Jana spoke about the small number of items that you need in order to submit a claim, the home medical equipment is why it hit the news so many times, does not add a ton of oversight. As we spoke about home care and hospice, there's a body that comes and does a review. There's a body that comes and checks on what you're doing. Really, until the competitive bidding started, there was not any kind of regulation that said you had to be accredited by a joint commission or a CHAP or an ACHC, that somebody would come and help to monitor what you're doing. So submitted claims, somebody paid you, you got back. Until they started doing the oversight with the accrediting body requirement, also with the number of record reviews that we referred to when they started doing those, the way regulations read and the interpretation by a provider, if I thought I was meeting the regulations, I for it. Until the record reviews started coming through and somebody from the outside started looking to ensure that you truly were compliant with that local or national coverage determination, people paid for a lot of things, and they really stretched the interpretation of those regulations. So until it started getting looked at, people paid for a lot of services. It was really easy to receive payment, and nobody questioned it.
I think that is one of the reasons all of our business lines are being looked at today. We go to people's homes, whether it's with equipment, whether it's home care, whether it's with hospice, our home infusion business. So we provide our services in the confines of a home versus the confines of a building or a facility where people actually come to us. I also think that news, bad news, if we provide good service, patients don't want us to discharge them, want us to continue caring for them. The obstacle there is they have to meet certain criteria in order for us to provide these services. And I think it's difficult for patients, especially those that live alone. It's difficult, and they have a hard time not understanding why these services have to stop. And I think as nurses and caregivers, sometimes it's difficult for us, when we know that's a fact, to actually stop the services. I have definitely seen patients who no longer met the criteria, but they were on service because the agency's caregiver, the patient would have no one else. If we went away, the patient would have no one else. So I think it's those kinds of things, and then when those records get looked at, now you've got patients that don't meet the eligibility or the requirements, or, that will become a false claim.
Yeah. Another thought, too, one other question which might be good to touch on is, CAI has been slowly kind of moving some of our existing home health agencies and others into this consolidated organization. I think the plan is eventually to get everybody in there. Can you talk a little bit about what you do when you bring on an entity, whether it's one of CHI entities or others that you're serving, from a client standpoint, to make sure that they've got a good compliance infrastructure from day one when we bring them on and they become part of your organization?
We go into the organizations, whether it's an integration or a purchase, and we basically put them through the same review that we put our own agencies through. So we will identify potentially high-risk diagnoses. We will identify patients with a long length of stay, whether that be home health or hospice. We look at patients who have multiple what we call recerts. That means they're recertified in a home health episode over and over again. We look at patients who receive a tremendous amount of therapy because home health is paid a higher episodic rate on patients that receive a lot of therapy. So we look at all of that criteria. We pull those records, and we literally look for the clinical documentation to make sure that it supports the care that we say we are providing. We look at caregiver records to make sure that not every state, yet today, this one's a little unbelievable, but not every state requires background checks on caregivers. And so that is one of the things that we look at. There are certain criteria that have to be met on states that do have background checks. Look at the competencies of the staff. Are they competent? Have they been competency tested? Do we know that they can be out in that home alone, providing the care that's required? We will do shared visits. So again, we will go out with those clinicians of the other agency and watch the care that's being provided. We pay attention to their documentation and their assessment. We try to look at their care assessment, their end of care assessments, because again, you can be up-coded or down-coded based on your assessment. We look at their coding to ensure that they aren't up-coding or down-coding, but they're right coding. Your hospice, we make sure their NOEs are done timely, that their notice of election is done timely. We look to make sure that their certificate of terminal illness meets all the requirements.
From the HME perspective, the same principles apply. Did they have everything they needed in order to bill? They didn't just have the Medicare number and the person's name and a product code. That actually had the rest of the documentation that supported it. What we do with that information is not only look at it for ourselves and what it's going to mean when we bring on that organization, but we share that. The issues where their interpretation of the regulations may have been different than what we have experienced as a larger organization, because most of the branches, the companies that we're looking at are not as large as us. They do not have the resources that we are lucky enough to have. So we've had a number of record reviews from Medicare or managed Medicares or Medicaids, for example, the state surveys that we've had for state or part for home care or hospice, or the Joint Commission or CHAP accreditation experiences that we've had. We share with them that reg or what that standard really is seen really meaning by somebody else, so that way, whether they do come with us or not, depending upon where we are with a transition or a purchase, that we've given them information to bet themselves, and from a perspective of it are truly becoming a part of CHI Health at Home, that has started, that knowledge, those experiences, that transition has occurred before us day one. So they have started practices that will make them a more compliant organization when they do join family. So that as well.
Do you have any other questions? I know I paused all the questions, but does anybody have any questions?
There are questions.
I do think it's difficult for agencies that are Department of an acute care. Home health is so small compared to acute care. I think what you're going to see, or what we're going to see in the very near future, is more care being provided in the home versus or even a hospital stay. I think that we are the least expensive dollar that we spent, and so I do believe that we will absolutely see care, hospice, or post-acute providers. I think you're going to see a very large amount of growth in the very near future. People want to be home. They necessarily want to be institutionalized, whether it's a hospital setting or SNF setting. And I think that is simply going to be the way of the future. I think you'll see more acute care actually being provided in home as we continue to try to work with our hospital partners to keep their readmission rates down.
Yeah, Janice, to that point, I think that's really going to help support the effort for keeping health care costs down as well.
Yeah, I think just CMS making these bundles, rebate purchasing in the 9 states they did. I expect to see that grow for all states. We're very active in trying to work with the ACOs and the CINs and all the bund payments. We actually have a pilot going in one of our Northern Kentucky locations with one of our other partner hospitals where they are doing same-day joint replacements. So doing them on an outpatient basis, sending them home the same day with us coming in then and providing the care that would typically be provided in the hospital over a 2 to 4 or 5 day period. So I just see us becoming more and more important in the healthcare arena as time goes.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for providing this webcast. We really appreciate it. And we do encourage anybody on the phone, if you have any questions, any follow-up questions, feel free to email me at Michelle with 2 L's, coop@catholichealth.net, and we'll be happy to follow up. And also, if you do see your peers, other board members, other audit and compliance committee members, please encourage them to listen to the webcast. All 10 webcasts are available, and we'll be sending out follow-up information on how to access the webcast. And everybody has a blessed holiday season. Merry Christmas to all, and we hope to have time with you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.